Although it's been overlooked in the years since, at 26 episodes, the new Statesman was undoubtedly the longest-running star vehicle for comedy legend Rik Mayall. The sitcom that Mayall asked Lawrence Marks and Maurice Grant to write is about Alan Bastard, a Conservative MP who embodied the core ideals of Thatcherism: money and power by any means necessary. The series follows him as he tries to either profit from his position or save his reputation, and although he's the personification of evil, it's a kind of evil that's very fun to watch. Despite appearing on the surface to have the political subtlety of a sledgehammer, the show was a fantastic satire that still manages to be disturbingly relevant and even prophetic today. However, whilst the show was always funny, it took a while to find its footing with the correct supporting characters, with many only appearing in Series 1 before being discarded. Let's find out why. So, let's look at each of the supporting characters in Series 1 and what role they had in the show. Probably the most important one in Series 1 is Norman Borman, played by R.R. Cooper, Alan's dodgy accountant who is on the run from the law.
You fleeing the country?
That's what they expect me to do. No, I've decided to kill myself off. Norman Borman is simply going to cease to exist.
How do you mean?
I'm going to become a woman.
Now, I'm not going to discuss the trans representation in this, not only because I'm cis-het, but because I don't know enough about the history of trans representation in media, and a character transitioning for a reason other than gender dysphoria is messy. But if you are someone who makes videos on the history of queer media, please consider making one on this show. I'd love to watch it. Anyway, Norman's role in the show is to tell Alan of new business schemes or warn him of an impending crisis, making them essential to the 5 episodes they're in. They're effectively there for the audience to learn of that week's plan, either by learning it from Alan or, more commonly, by coming up with the plan themselves. Then there's Alan's supporting cast at work. He shares his office with 2 fellow Tory backbencher MPs, Piers Fletcher-Dervish, played by Michael Troughton, who appears in 5 episodes of Series 1, and Sir Stephen Baxter, played by John Nettleton, who appears in 4. Piers is a feeble, posh dimwit from an old money family whose safe seat has been in his family for generations. He is basically Bastard's unwilling henchman, appalled by Alan's outlook and methods, but either intimidated or easily conned into cooperation. A lot of comedy comes not only from Piers' obtuseness, but from how easily Alan can manipulate his naivete into doing what he wants.
Piers, if you help me, I'll get you one of those new Ocelot supercats. Really? Do you promise? No.
Sir Stephen Baxter is an old Tory who practices what he preaches, genuinely concerned with conservative moral values and the preservation of tradition, in contradiction to Bastard, who only uses those talking points in public for his own personal gain. For example, in the episode Sex is Wrong, he has set up a campaign for the abolition of adult media that he is genuinely horrified by. Meanwhile, Alan only turns up to swipe the dirty pictures for himself before coming up with a way to profit from it. He's kind of a similar role to Piers in a way by being shocked and disgusted by Bastard's actions, but doesn't undertake the lackey role. There's only really 2 episodes where his presence has any impact on the plot, and that's by being impersonated by Alan in Sex is Wrong, and introducing Alan to a fellow MP in Bar Black Sheep. So even when his character does have a function, it's minimal. As for the opposition, there's Labour MP Bob Crippen, played by Nick Stringer. He only appears in 3 episodes of Series 1, and has a relatively minor role in each of them. He's self-righteous and short-tempered, but I don't think that he was very good as a parody of Labour. He's really just a rival there for Alan to insult. Then there's Alan's wife Sarah, the spoiled daughter of an aristocrat who only married Alan for the money, and who Alan married because her father is the head of the Conservative Selection Committee in his constituency. She hates Alan, and, in this series, she only really plays an important role in the episode Passport to Freedom, where she plans to divorce Alan, and even then, she only appears in 1 scene. Then she refuses to appear as Alan's doting wife when he has to put on a devoted Christian image to impress an evangelical American businessman in the episode Bar Black Sheep, forcing him to hire a mid-transition Norma to take her place. The character is pretty unremarkable apart from how frank her discontent towards Alan is, although I think Marcia Fitz-Allen did a great job with what she'd been given.
Don't let's spoil a perfectly stable marriage by trying to reintroduce sex into it.
Her father, Roland Gidleigh-Park, played by Charles Gray, despises Alan, both as a politician and as a son-in-law. He's a xenophobic old money Tory and is revolted by how nouveau riche and tacky Alan is, as well as his disinterest in serving his constituents.
You never hold surgeries, you don't ask questions in the House, you throw away constituents' letters, and you take absolutely no interest in local industry.
All right, I admit it, I'm not perfect.
He only appears in 2 episodes and is an important component of each of them, as he has assets Alan needs for his schemes. But he fails to make enough of an impression aside from the fact that he's played by the Rocky Horror Blofeld. Sarah is also having an affair with her old school friend and Alan's press secretary, Beatrice Protheroe, played by Vivian Heilbronn. She's there to have an affair with Sarah? Nothing against the actress, but it's a very forgettable straight woman role who only appears briefly in 3 episodes. The only time we see her without Sarah is her 3rd appearance, Sex is Wrong, where she's there to establish that Alan will try it on with anyone in a skirt, which we see throughout the show with everyone else. I guess that they might have written this part so that we don't feel too sorry for Sarah, or just to derive comedy from the fact that Alan is being unknowingly cuckolded, or because the existence of gayness was funnier back then. I'm not saying that it's necessarily homophobic in that respect, but it's just something that I've noticed in some older comedy. The visibility of gay people was more rare, so it had more comedic value because it was surprising.
Give it to your boyfriend. I haven't got a boyfriend. You did have.
Finally, there's pub landlord and former hangman Sidney Bliss, who wants his old job back. He's briefly introduced in the 1st episode, but he only plays a role in the episode when Norman refuses to dump nuclear waste under a school, and Alan persuades Sidney with a promise to bring back capital punishment. The issue with having so many side characters is that most of them get so little screen time that none of them really make that much of an impact. I suppose it did show the variety of types of conservative, but it did spread itself a bit too thin. When I think of successful sitcoms that had a large supporting cast, they are either there throughout like Dad's Army or built up over several years like Only Fools and Horses. I don't want that to discourage you from watching the show though. It is still hilarious from the very beginning, and Marks and Gran did a great job of whittling it down to something more manageable. Let's start off with who didn't return in Series 2. It'll probably be no surprise that Beatrice didn't come back. Norma also didn't return, and there are many possible reasons as to why. The first was that the gimmick of a character transitioning during the series couldn't really be taken any further. They purposefully kept Rowena Cooper's gender ambiguous by leaving out her first name on the end credits until the end of the series, so it's clear that the actress's gender was supposed to be something of a reveal. There may well have never been plans to bring the character back in the 2nd series. It's implied that her pretending to be Alan's wife at the end of Series 1 is her one last job for him so that she can pay for her bottom surgery. However, the fact that they had such a big role also may have had a part in their departure, as the series did improve in their absence. Alan is now solely responsible for all of his plans, making them more powerful. The writers do a better job of making Alan's plans clear without him necessarily having an ally to discuss them with, and making him a lone wolf makes the audience feel like they're his only witnesses. The only time we see a similar character is in the Series 2 episode The Holton Price Bunker, and I think that was just so Stephen Fry could have a guest appearance rather than anything else. Alan could have easily come to the conclusion that finding a Nazi war criminal would lead to good publicity by himself. There is, of course, the possibility that they were asked by those working at Yorkshire Television to make the show less queer. But the departures of both Norma and Beatrice improved the series from a story perspective, so this may well be a case of correlation, not causation. Sarah's father also didn't return, although we do see her talking to him on the phone in Who Shot Alan Bastard, a special between Series 2 and 3. Alan is unselected as the Conservative candidate in Series 3, so presumably by then he is either dead or no longer in the selection committee, as he isn't mentioned. So Stephen Baxter appeared in the Series 2 episode Live from Westminster to decry how the televising of proceedings in the House of Commons had turned the political institution into a music hall. This actually aired 11 months before they were first broadcast in 1989. Anyway, he can be heard as he's leaving the office that he will take up the peerage he's been offered to get away from Bastard's commercialisation of his celebrity, so he's neatly written out of the show. I'm not going to explain the House of Lords now, I don't get it either. I only know slightly more about politics than Piers. I suppose that his role was partially taken by Piers by being outraged by Alan, which was all Sir Stephen really did. He was always very disposable. Crippen appeared briefly in the first episode of Series 2, but wasn't really important to that episode and was never seen again. Sidney Bliss returns after Series 2 in the episode Who Shot Alan Bastard, but you may not have noticed because he's no longer played by Peter Sallis, which sucks because that means we no longer have Wallace from Wallace and Gromit describing violent execution methods.
Your hardened criminals, now they were hung, drawn and quartered. That is to say, sir, they used to hang them up, cut them down while they were still kicking, draw the entrails out of them with hooks, cut the body into 4 pieces and then stick the head on a pole as a deterrent. You can't make an omelette without breaking necks.
John Normington did do a good job, but he wasn't particularly memorable. I imagine that they had already decided that the character wasn't really necessary to the show, but wanted to finish their planned storyline of him finally getting his job back. It's worth mentioning that, whilst not an official supporting character, that Maggie Thatcher herself, played by Spitting Image's Thatcher impressionist Steve Nallen, appears in an episode of Series 1, Series 2, and the special Who Shot Alan Bastard, as well as the comic relief sketch Alan Bastard Closes Down the BBC. They didn't do the same with her successor John Major, but that's presumably because he was notoriously dull.
I mean, have you ever had a conversation with John Major?
No.
Nor have I. I mean, I've tried to, but I keep nodding off halfway through. I'm not saying he's dull, but he is the only boy in history to run away from the circus to join a firm of accountants.
Pierce's character didn't change in the show, but his role did get bigger, becoming Alan's sole lackey and appearing in every episode after Series 1 apart from the 1994 special. Alan either wants something that Piers can give him, or he has some role in the government that Alan wants to exploit. And, of course, being the victim of increasingly violent and creative slapstick.
What is a hot seat?
Piers, sometimes you just make things too easy, don't you?
He's such an important asset to Alan that when Piers is about to get married in the Series 2 episode May the Best Man Win, and his fiancée tells him that he will no longer do Alan's bidding, he goes out of his way to try and neutralise her as a threat. He's a perfect counterpart to Alan, and makes the show all the more enjoyable to watch. Piers does briefly rebel at some points himself, but this never lasts long, partially due to his own incompetence.
There's dirty money around and I want my share.
How much?
£1.50.
You're a hard man, Piers Fletcher-Dervish. Solid bone from the neck up.
And don't you forget it.
I'm worried that how little I've talked about him doesn't really get across how big a part he had in the show, but he doesn't really change throughout, so there's not as much to discuss here. Which is more than I can say for Sarah. Sarah's role is also bigger in Series 2, going on to appear in nearly every episode thereafter. She doesn't appear in the first episode of Series 2, but when she appears in the next one, she almost has more dialogue with Alan than she did in the entire first series, and she only has an impact on the plot halfway through. Now that Beatrice is no longer in the show, Sarah is as promiscuous as Alan. She is seen almost exclusively sleeping with men, but she does show an interest in Piers' fiancée Clarissa in Series 2.
She'd screw anything in trousers.
Really? Can I borrow your pyjama bottom?
And sleeps with Frau Kleist, played by Bridget Kahn, a German MEP Alan shares an office with, who appears in 2 episodes of Series 4, which I won't get into now because things get complicated in Series 4. Anyway, in Series 2, she is still hostile towards Alan, but the extravagant spending habits that Alan complained about in Series 1 are exaggerated so that she is now a full-on shopaholic.
You sabotage my career.
What career?
Shopping.
In the episode The Great Wapping Conspiracy, Alan is suing for libel, and he has to once again represent the image of a wholesome home life. But this time, Sarah's performance as a loving housewife is easily bought.
Why should I help you, you degenerate little creep?
I'll give you 10% of the damages if we win.
10%, try 50.
You're joking. 20.
40.
25.
Done.
Although she makes it clear that she has no interest in Alan and could be a thorn in Alan's side, she can also be recruited as an ally when needed. She's a bit more proactive in her hostility, even taking on something of her father's role in mocking Alan for being nouveau riche. In Series 3, Sarah becomes more interesting. She's still promiscuous, money-hungry and insulting, but now, despite her being very open about Alan's sexual inadequacies, she's also interested in him. They are bonking, even if it's sometimes just a time soft-boiling a quail's egg.
55 seconds, perfect.
Less than a minute, eh? Getting quicker.
Her cooperation, when needed, still has to be bought, and she doesn't hold her tongue on how unimpressive Alan is in bed. But she is attracted to him, and they are now occasionally partners in crime. A great example of their relationship is in the episode Let Them Sniff Cake. Alan enrages animal rights protesters, resulting in several failed attempts on his life. Sarah is a member and offers to smooth things over with them for a few £1,000s, but he refuses. It turns out that Sarah was behind most of the threats, but it was just so that he would buy her the fur coat Greta Garbo screwed Rudolph Valentino on. Alan, now that the initial rage has passed, thinks that's pretty cool and threatens Sotheby's into handing it over for free by pretending to be one of those animal rights terrorists.
You bastard.
You're learning, Sarah.
This does make sense from a character development perspective. She has become acclimated to being married to an amoral scumbag and is now rolling with the punches for her own personal gain, becoming more and more like a female Alan. This dynamic where she can be all over him in one episode and planning his assassination in the next is so much fun to watch because it could very much go either way, even within the same episode. They are, as they say on Twitter, two people who match each other's freak. This continues into Series 4, with Alan murdering Sarah's fiancé in one episode and getting her a job as Piers' secretary in the next, but things get complicated in Series 4. I think it's a sign of how good the character is that they kept her on, because it would have been much easier for them to write her out of the show entirely.
So pleased that you two aren't bad friends anymore.
Yes. Isn't it extraordinary just how much true love you can buy for 600 grand?
By flanking Bastard with his opposite and his frenemy, he has plenty of opportunity to shine against them whilst they are established enough to be memorable. That's not to say that more supporting characters weren't introduced after Series 1, but they were better utilised and only there when necessary. As I mentioned, there's that German MEP who doesn't overstay her welcome and functions well in her 2 episodes. But, of course, I'm not going to get into Series 4 right now. Then there's Geoff Diquead, played by Beric Kaler, an obnoxious journalist who appears mostly in the background in Series 2 and only really makes a notable appearance in the final episode of Series 2 and the following special Who Shot Alan Bastard. My guess is that they wanted to use him later in the series and then wrote him into press scenes of earlier episodes. His first 2 credited appearances only had a couple of lines, and his role's no bigger than that of the other fellow reporter, Peter Moran, played by... Wait, what? Andy Serkis, what are you doing here? I hadn't noticed that he was in so many episodes until looking on IMDb. He wasn't a bad character, but I don't think that they could have done any more with him after Who Shot Alan Bastard, so I'm glad he didn't return. He had some function in the plot, but he's really just a gag character more than anything else. The final episode of Series 2 sees the introduction of Sir Greville McDonald, a Conservative cabinet minister who has made Piers a junior minister for his own personal gain. He's also having an affair with Sarah, which Alan of course blackmails him for in a later episode. He basically acts as a face for the government, introducing key plot points as well as being a pawn of Alan's political intrigue.
I've misjudged you, Bastard. Many do.
He's something of a moderate version of Alan, someone who has affairs and uses his position to line his own pocket, but he's not quite as extreme or amoral. He's a party above country Tory, rather than a self above everyone else Tory. At the beginning of Series 4, he's a big part of Alan's plan to set himself up in Brussels, but their differing values finally come to a head in the final episode, but I won't get into that now, because things get complicated in Series 4. The beginning of Series 3 sees the introduction of Paddy O'Rourke, played by Benjamin Whitrow, a senior Labour minister who, like Sir Greville does with the Tory cabinet, gives the opposition a face as Bastard plays the 2 parties against each other. He only appears in one other episode in Series 3, but I think he was a much better character than Crippen. They do a much better job of actually parodying Labour with him. In his first appearance, he reveals to Alan that his Irish accent is fake and that many high-profile Labour leaders had faked working-class regional accents to get ahead in the polls. He briefly turns up at the end of Series 4 when Alan returns to British politics. But blah-de-blah spoilers, blah-de-blah complicated. The new Statesman hit the ground running with Alan Bastard, a character who deserves to be remembered in the pantheon of Mayall's greatest characters, as well as his most iconic performances. Although the writers struggle to find their footing with the supporting cast, They streamlined it to 2 entertaining characters played well by their respective actors. What few other supporting characters were introduced in Series 2 onwards were used effectively, only appearing when essential to the plot. This video was a video essay rather than a review, but I still hope it persuades you to check out the show if you haven't already. I am planning on making a review video on it next year for my Rik Mayall month, Rik May, and you can check out my reviews from last Rik May right here. See you soon!
Mickey, it's so unnecessary to hit anybody.
Yeah, you're right. How about if I kick him?